Ladies and gentlemen, how do?
Has the renowned and prolific liar who sits in the White House declared a fake ceasefire in the illegal war between Israel and Iran? Is this more of the usual blustering and posturing that just seems to pour out of Trump like the proverbial verbal diarrhea we are growing ever more accustomed to hearing? Trump was on his Truth Social, proclaiming that this is the ceasefire to end all conflict in the Middle East and praising God, but most of all praising himself with the usual twaddle about being the only one that is capable of achieving this blah blah blah, then running off to change his Depends diaper. The Iranian foreign minister was claiming the opposite was true, and who should we believe? Mr. Liar Lot. I am the anti-war president that's just illegally bombed another sovereign country, or the leaders of the country that were just bombed.
Hold. That is going to be the big question. And let me just rewind back. It's been a really turbulent 12 hours over here in the Middle East. But of note is in the middle of the night, President Trump put out a post on Truth Social announcing that Iran and Israel had agreed to a ceasefire. Now, in the subsequent hours, it was unclear whether both sides had actually signed on to that ceasefire. They continued to exchange blows up until about an hour ago. And about 15 minutes ago, we did hear from the Israeli Prime Minister's office saying and confirming that Israel have now formally agreed to that ceasefire. But I do just want to add a couple of comments here, because they've also said that Israel will respond forcefully to a breach of truce. And if you remember, it's quite similar to the wording of the truce agreement that Israel had in place with Hezbollah at the time when they agreed the ceasefire. It was a ceasefire in principle, but again, Israel reserved the right to still strike back at certain Hezbollah targets should they deem to have contravened the ceasefire. So perhaps we're going to get similar language on that front. The Prime Minister will be delivering a statement later today, but ultimately they are saying that they have achieved their Iran war goals. And as a reminder, their explicit war goals in Iran, and I say explicit, were to ensure that Iran does not go on to have the capabilities to develop a nuclear weapon.
And after Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard in March said Iran had an unprecedented amount of enriched uranium for a non-nuclear state, but that the Ayatollah had not ordered the development of a nuclear weapon.
And to sufficiently diminish their ability to continue to launch ballistic missiles towards Israel. They deem, and this is the language coming from the Israeli Prime Minister's office today, that both of those war goals have been achieved. And so from this point onwards, we'll have to see whether the diplomatic channel can actually overtake, and of course, whether all of this means that Iran will return to the negotiating table with the U.S. and perhaps sign on to some of the more stringent concessions that the U.S. had been pushing for vis-a-vis getting that nuclear deal across the line.
This is the problem. We don't know when that's going to happen. We don't know what the objective of that is all going to be. We don't know whether or not Iran will resist. Is there a sense from the conversations you've been having thus far that this is a temporary ceasefire, that this is something that can hold, that talks will follow?
I think it's very unclear at this point what the Iranian perspective is thinking. Earlier on in the morning, we had a post put out by the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, saying that there was no ceasefire agreement, but they had no intention to keep responding to Israeli attacks after 4 a.m. Tehran time. But of course, they did go on to launch a volley of attacks at Israel in the early hours of this morning.
Allahu Akbar. Adam.
During the early hours of this morning, Iran fired 6 ballistic missiles at the U.S. military base in Qatar. The media are reporting this as some sort of act of aggression and banging the war drums with claims of Iran not being interested in a ceasefire, when in fact it is the very opposite of that, and it is one very clever form of Iran wanting de-escalation. I will let a very good friend of the channel, Mr. David McGuinness, explain this.
Iran did fire missiles towards American bases, but they gave the countries their bases were in 3 hours notice, told them exactly when they were fired, and they sent ordinary missiles, no hypersonic missiles, so that they could be shot down. What Iran did yesterday was warn Middle Eastern states and the US that they could get there. They could get there with their missiles. What Iran did yesterday was very clever, very diplomatic. They retaliated, but they made sure that that retaliation did the strike. They told the Qataris and the Iraqis it was coming. They told the Yanks it was coming. They told them when it would arrive. And they told them to prepare. What they were doing was showing the Americans that the Iranians had the ability to reach their bases in the Middle East. And they were warning the countries that are hosting these countries, the American bases, sorry, they warned the countries that are hosting the American bases. You're no safe having these fucking American bases on your lands. And you're right, Sir Larry, the Iranians did it as a de-escalation. They had to fire back, and they had the right to do so under international law. Now, any further strikes by the US would be illegal. They were illegal to start with. But Iran, what they did was proportionate, and what they did was clever. And Iran has been very good at sticking to international law, only striking out when they get struck, because they are exercising their right to defend themselves. And see, what they did yesterday was diplomatically very clever. It put the wind up the Yanks, and it put the wind up the countries who are hosting these American bases. And that was a clever move. Because the Americans now live in fear of the bases being struck in the Middle East, and the countries who are hosting the American bases are now fearful that their civilian population could be hurt because the Yanks are there. It was very clever for the Iranians yesterday. Proportionate and clever. It was a wonderful, wonderful piece of diplomacy, even though there was weapons involved in it. Can't fault them. They have stuck strictly within the rules of international law. Can't say the same for the Americans, the Israelis, the UK, or any other fucker that's complicit in Israel's crimes. And let's get this straight, folks. Israel is the outlaw here. Israel is the bad guy. Israel is the bloodthirsty, genocidal monster that we're all saying in the independent media that Israel is, but we are not being told in the mainstream media what Israel is. Netanyahu is a bloody dictator, a tyrant, and a genocidal maniac, and Israel is a rogue state and has been for as long as I've been alive. They see themselves as God's chosen people, and they see themselves as being above man's law. And that's not fucking on. In fact, to be fair, they see themselves above God's law. And I don't know nothing about that. I'm no religious man. They just see themselves above every fucking law and standard that we have.
Update. The Orange G-Bus fake ceasefire that Iran says they never agreed to because they knew nothing about. It would appear to be about as bigly as Trump's tiny mushroom and have about as much staying power as it is virtually in tatters, with both sides pointing the finger, and Orange Fat Boy getting so frustrated that he had a little hissy fit while live on the air.
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too. Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. the biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
What are your thoughts on this ceasefire? Drop them in the comments below. And if you haven't done so yet, then please subscribe to the Two Davies channel for news and politics from a Scottish perspective.